First speak is Ben Goertzel. Yeah, please.
All right, everyone's still out there having coffee. So, hey people, get back in here.
You want me to go in?
Yeah, why not? Make one more effort. Yeah, I can't compete with coffee and tea. Everyone was forced to get up so early this morning. Yeah, so my previous talks have been focused on different parts of the OpenCog architecture. Now, today I'm actually giving two talks which are a bit more lightweight and reflect interesting things that I think will be good for people in the AGI community to think about, regardless of what paradigm you're looking at. Now, this is sort of a strange topic. It's a language which is a speakable form of predicate logic, and I think that this actually would be an interesting thing for AGI researchers to play with from a variety of standpoints. You probably heard of Esperanto, which is a language, an invented language, but Esperanto is still similar to ordinary human languages. Lojban is a form of speakable logic. There's several hundred speakers who I'd have to say is about the nerdiest group of people I've ever met, and I sort of number myself among that group, although I'm not quite fluent. It has a completely unambiguous syntax, similar to a programming language. You can make the semantics very unambiguous, but you can also be very ambiguous, in some ways more ambiguous than regular natural languages. And the phonology is worked out to make speech to text very easy. Now, to the annoyance of the 300 speakers of Lojban, I've been advocating an ugly hybrid where I insert English words into Lojban now and then, which is because Lojban vocabulary isn't complete. There are some everyday things that have no Lojban words. So if you don't hack English in now and then, you have to pause and invent a new word now and then, which is awkward. And I call that Lojban plus just to be obnoxious. But if you insert occasional English words into Lojban, it still basically works. It doesn't break the nice properties. So the Lojban dictionary, which is online, I'll give a link to it. It basically precisely specifies the subcategorization frames of different predicates. So instead of noun, verb, preposition, blah blah blah, you have about 70 glue words, which are called shmavo, and all the rest are these predicates. So, for example, the predicate for go and come has 5 arguments. One is the person who's going, the entity that's going or coming, then the origin, the route, the destination, and the means of transport. And if you're into computational linguistics, it's a fair bit like FrameNet, which takes verbs and then specifies certain arguments that are in this subcategorization frame of that verb, except Lojban doesn't really distinguish verb, noun, adverb, adjective. They're all just predicates. So similarly, the shatra, the Lojban verb to kill, you have the killer, the killee, and then the action or method of killing. And of course, if you have other arguments that are not listed there's a mechanism to add them on. There's just a few that are provided. So, as a simple example, if you have the sentence, when are you going to the mountain? You say, do shuhe klama leismana. That's you, when, go, the mountain. And the difference from a natural language is, if you wanted to translate into some logic representation for a formal reasoning system, it's quite direct. You could just code rules to go from that to that. It's unambiguous. It would work for every similar sentence. Now, if you forgot the word for mountain, which in this case is very simple, if you stuck English words in within the syntax, that can also work, as long as you're not using English glue words. If you're just using English content words. So for example, we're going to say, when you're going to the small obsidian mountain. So this do shuhe le shmalu shmana poi marji lo glashi roxy. This is it. You when the small mountain, and this is it's made of ice rock. No, that's made of glass rock. Sorry, it's glass rock. Made of glass rock. So that's sort of okay. You could guess obsidian is glass rock, but that's kind of a hack. And if you just stick the English word in there, it doesn't particularly break anything either. So you can, you have, if you want to rearrange the arguments in a different order, there's words allowing that. So this is that which goes from Atlanta to Boston by car. Clama fi la Atlanta, fe la Boston, fu le carse. And I mean, if you're familiar with predicate logic, you can get the general idea of what's going on. I mean, you specify the predicate, like first argument, second argument, then this is the fifth argument or something, and there's a different preposition, a different schmavo preposition-like word to indicate which argument of the predicate you're sticking it in, basically. And honestly, if everyone spoke this language, we'd have a lot easier time in the world, because we could translate the language directly into logic, and you'd have a lot less need for lawyers to argue about the details of what things mean, because things can be made as precise as you want. Now, if you look at what's done in a project like Psych, where they try to code a huge amount of knowledge in predicate logic, it takes a really long time. They'd be better off just to teach all their staff Lojban, and then instead of, if you want to say, hey, I just saw a bunch of troops going in the woods, what do you want me to do? Say, I mean, you could type in some horribly complex predicate logic formula, and you'd probably get it wrong. I think that's right, but it takes a while. I mean, in Psych, it took a couple hours for each definition they put in the Psych-L logic language. On the other hand, if you know Lojban, it's not particularly slower than using another natural language. I mean, I'm faster in Lojban than I am in Spanish, and I took 3 years of college Spanish, but I'm pretty bad in Spanish. And the people, I know a married couple near DC who are both fluent in Lojban, and they speak it together, so they can speak behind other people's backs, and they'll be quite surprised if anyone can understand them. Well, one of the interesting things in Lojban is handling of quantifiers, which are fairly messed up in natural language. So here, you want to say something sees me. Essentially what you're saying here is there's at least one x so that x sees me. So that this is basically so that, and this is the marker for the variable x. And you could have dot is x, like day is an x variable y. So you can explicitly use variables and quantifiers. So you could speak an arbitrarily complex expression with multiple existential and universal quantifiers. And you can also, of course, speak open and closed parentheses of various sorts. So what's fascinating to me is there's a community of people who actually, there's a Lodge Fest every year. There's a community of people who actually can speak back and forth this way with the same fluency we can use with natural languages. So you can actually talk in logic. And so here's another example of a word I'm going to use in the next example. So stand, you can, x1 stands on surface x2 supported by x3. So why does this interest me for AI? Because I think that, we're trying to build or teach an AI. you're trying to solve a large number of coupled problems, all of which depend on each other. Like if a system understood language better, you could teach it a lot of things. Those things you would teach it would help it understand other things better. I mean, just as with the lecture Dalit gave this morning, if a system could see better, certainly that helps it a lot to do a lot of other things. Whether that helps it 80% or 30% of the way is a question, but it certainly helps. So the interesting thing is if you did use Lojban instead of a natural language, then almost all of the language processing problem goes away, and you have a system that you could communicate with back and forth in natural language. Now that certainly doesn't solve everything in AI by any means, but it would mean that you had a system that you could talk to in a way that's a lot less annoying than decoding predicate logic constructs and typing in predicate logic constructs. So to illustrate some of the power this would give you, so say you're communicating with a video game character, say, doshu sanli lebliku. So that's you stand on the block, right? You don't need to specify, kind of like in Chinese, you don't need to specify a tense in Lojban unless it's important. You just say you stand block. It could be past, present, future. You can give a tense marker with more precision than English tense markers if you have to, but you're not required to specify one. Or we can say you're standing on the block. Now, this isn't particularly hard to process anyway. Like OpenCog's language pipeline can deal with this just fine. So there's not any particularly large advantage there. Now, you're on fire. Now, of course, the word on here means something different than in the case you're standing on a block, right? And preposition disambiguation is one of these things that computational linguistics currently deals with very badly. I mean, we can disambiguate nouns and verbs okay, adverbs and adjectives so, and prepositions, it's pretty horrible in the current state of things. I mean, there's a community working on it, they're making progress, but it's hard. Here, it's just, okay, you burn, right? No? We could say you burn in English, of course. You could use a carefully controlled English, but there's a history of that which shows we're not very good at that, actually. People are bad at using a carefully controlled English, and for me, it's more work than using Lojban, even though I'm not good at Lojban, because we just naturally use idioms and strange constructs. You're on fire again, so that's back to a different sense of fire. She's not actually burning, she's standing on the fire. Although, if you caught fire while firewalking and someone said, you're on fire, then you could be confused, right? But in Lojban, you wouldn't be confused, and you would put the fire out, and Lojban would save your life. Here you can say, dos spana jalsa. That means you are atop the fire, basically. Now, of course, you could say you are atop the fire in English, but nobody does, because we're not used to using English that way. Now, say you're robot Einstein, you say turn the TV on. Now that could be confusing, right? It could rotate the TV around in circles because the TV is on something, and what does turn mean? Now, of course, you could also say activate the television or something precise like that. We tend not to. The Lojban is interesting. So, ko is an imperative. You put ko before instead of you just put ko there. It's a command, right? So that's very simple. That's imperative, and then rinka is cause, and there's 4 words for cause. This is a material causation. They divide it kind of according to the Aristotelian categories of causality. So you materially cause. They knew means the event. So we're saying imperative you materially cause the event of the TV awakening. Now, I used awaken there because I wasn't sure what word to use. I could have used activate or shine or something, but you see how the way it's broken down could be transformed into, predicate logic or nodes and links in OpenCog or relations in NARS quite easily and comprehensively, right? Okay, that's an imperative. Then you have causation event. This is the event of the TV wakes up. It all is quite natural and logical. And what's interesting is you can turn statements about the everyday world into logic in a quite natural way. Now, what I found, which impressed me, is that the Lojban language and the ontology underlying that does a far better job of breaking down common sense into logic than Psych or than FrameNet or WordNet or all these resources built by computational linguists. It makes more sense. And the reason is that these guys broke it down that way because they actually wanted to communicate back and forth. And it was refined. This was invented in like 1960 or something. So it's been refined by a few hundred hardcore language geeks over many decades. So if people are actually interested in kind of ontology and structured knowledge-based approaches to bridging language and logical understanding of the world, as freaky as this stuff is, it's actually makes more sense than the computational linguistics resources out there in practical terms. Because the criterion that these guys used in refining the language was they wanted to be able to compactly and precisely express the everyday stuff they wanted to talk about, which is the right criterion to use. So I think if we had a Lojban language infrastructure, that would be quite cool to use to converse with an AI system. And you could converse in parallel, right? You could take your AI in a virtual world. You could talk to it in Lojban and talk to it in English, and you then be generating a parallel corpus, and it would then learn to interpret the English by comparison. Now, I haven't actually implemented much of this yet because I'm so busy. I don't have much time to program, and I haven't found many good programmers who know Lojban. So that's a difficult job qualification to hire for. So anyway, I decided to submit the paper on this because I think it's an interesting thing that more people should know about. Maybe someone will choose to do something with it. Right? And that's all. And if you want more, this is the Lojban dictionary, which is online and is growing all the time. There's certain rules for creating new words, so you can join their mailing list and have endless arguments about new Lojban words. And that's the Lojban website, generally.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Okay, question? Sounds bad. Is it based on the first order predicate logic, and if yes, then how it performs operations with concepts which are related to higher order predicates?
It is not restricted to first order predicate logic. The guy, James Cook Brown, who originally designed Logline, the predecessor to Lojban, was a huge fan of the philosopher Quine. So if you know Quine's work on semantics, a lot of that found its way into the Lojban quantifiers.
Okay, thank you very much.
The question, if you would like to build hierarchical parse trees or logical constructions, would you rely on structure of the arguments given to particular words, or you would need to use brackets?
You can certainly you can parse a Lojban sentence hierarchically. I mean, the best Lojban parser uses parsing expression grammars. Like there's a BNF grammar, but it's really long and annoying. A parsing expression grammar is like a set of rewrite rules, and using those rewrite rules, you can parse Lojban. But it's.
Do you need the brackets for this, or it is
brackets
all can be computed out of the frame structure of particular words?
I don't know what you mean by do you need brackets. I mean, you can parse a Lojban sentence into a tree directly using the parser.
Without ambiguity.
Yeah, without ambiguity. That's right.
And you don't
without syntactic ambiguity. I mean, there could still be. Say, there's a Lojban construct called a tanru, which is just basically a sequence of words. So if you're kind of lazy and you see a fat man, you could just put in essence the two Lojban, like I did glass mountain in there, right? So you could just put glass mountain or fat man together, and then all you know is that's two things concatenated. The ones that come after are dominant, but that's somewhat ambiguous. You could, of course, you could elaborate that, say man whose body contains a lot of fat, or man who is large or something. But you can also just say fat man, and that has semantic ambiguity. So if you put that into OpenCog or something, all you would know is you have a node that inherits from man and inherits from fat, right? And you wouldn't know why, you wouldn't know in what exact sense the man is fat. And that's actually, it's important, if you try to totally get rid of semantic ambiguity, I mean, it's impossible to do, but the more closely you approximate it, the bigger and longer your sentences would get, right?
Okay. Yeah,
So that's why I said it's completely syntactically unambiguous, just like a programming language, and it's controllably semantically ambiguous. So it's very easy to reduce semantic ambiguity almost as far as you want, but you're always going to leave some semantic ambiguity there, and you can actually be more ambiguous in some ways in Lojban than in normal language. So Lojban poetry is quite beautiful if you learn the language well enough to appreciate it.
Okay, so you mentioned that there are brackets supported by Lojban, right?
You can insert parentheses.
Yeah.
It is uncommon to have to do so, but you
what's the
can.
purpose of the parentheses? Whether to suppress semantic ambiguity or also to suppress, to fight with syntactic
No,
ambiguity?
there's no syntactic ambiguity.
So that's only for making a
Well,
semantic
you can use parentheses if you want to say something really, really complicated. I mean, it's not commonly used.
complicated semantically.
Yeah, and also the way you do anaphors is cool because, like, instead of if you say like, you know, the man went to the store, then he went to the office, or you could say that the man hit the big guy hit the little guy on the head, then he ran away, but he chased him. You don't know which guy refers to who. And in Lojban, you can just, in essence, tag words with subscripted reference and use them afterwards, which just like in a programming language. So.
I didn't get the plus part. What's your addition to it for
My
AGI?
addition to it is merely hacking in English words. Because the Lojban, which requires some subtlety, because you can't hack in every English word into every place. You can hack in English content words into the place of Lojban content words. And then the interesting question there, if you hack in an English word, because it doesn't exist in the Lojban dictionary, what do you assume about the argument structure? So you can say, if you hack in an English transitive verb, you should treat it within Lojban as if the first argument was the subject, the second argument was the object, for example. So you can make certain obvious conventions for inserting the English word within Lojban for those cases where there's no Lojban word.
So you don't think there's any more work to do to use it for a virtual world?
Well, the software toolkit for Lojban is incomplete, so there is more work to do. Otherwise, I would have done it already. I mean, there's a parser for Lojban, but it just checks correctness of a sentence. It doesn't actually there is at present no tool that takes in Lojban and outputs a logic expression. I mean, it's straightforward in principle to do, but the software doesn't quite do that. So that's the additional work, basically.
Okay, please.
My question is why you don't want to use Esperanto, which is actually also syntax is also not ambiguous, but it's much more easy for normal people to deal with it.
Well, Esperanto actually is ambiguous when you get into complex quantifier constructions and so forth. I mean, Esperanto is not a fully formalized language any more than is Spanish or Italian or English or whatever. I mean, it gets rid of the more egregious irregularities of ordinary languages, but actually it gets rid of many of the weird idioms. But when you come down to it, when you're looking at nested quantifiers and the meaning of and is ambiguous in Esperanto, for example. I mean, there's a lot of ands, right? Like, what does it mean? I went to the store and then to the restaurant. I went to the store and to the restaurant. When is and sequential? one is and Boolean, right? In Lojban you have many kinds of and. So the logical and the sequential and different kinds of and are different words. In Esperanto they're all and. So you're still actually left with a lot of ambiguity in Esperanto. Right?
Okay, thank you.